All right, we are officially live. Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Jessica Morrison, Realtor with Ferris Property Group, and tonight we get to break down home inspections, why they're awesome, why you need them, and what to look for. And with us tonight, we have Heartland HouseMaster and Trent Pena. So, Trent, thank you so much for your time this evening. How are you? How is the home inspection world? And all of that information.
Well, I am doing very well, and thanks, Jessica, for inviting me to be a part of this with you and get to share some insights on home inspection and the industry that we're involved in, a little bit about ourselves, but then mainly just to give some information to our audience on all sorts of things related to home inspections. And as you probably are aware, in the real estate world, anybody related to that industry has just had a very crazy but positive and very busy 2020. So a lot of unpredictable weeks and months. Of course, everybody went through those, but for us and our company, we have stayed very strong. We've kept very busy, which we're very thankful for. A lot of challenges have come with that, and kind of rolling with the punches as different information is presented, as we all know. But all in all, we've seen a very strong season, and all indicators show that that's going to continue at least for the near future. So buckle down and keep on trucking, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for our industry, whether it's housing or construction, in the labor and material force, there's really a great need. I think there's just not enough home inspectors to go around. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, there was definitely some time periods where in the last 3 months that we just weren't able to keep up with the demand that was coming in.
Hmm.
And you hate to see jobs being turned away because you just can't get to them within their inspection response time frame. But when we're 7, 8, 9 days out on our calendar, I understand in a transaction it's just not feasible. So we don't like to see when that happens, but the volume spiked, quickly without any warning, and you just got to do your best to keep up and stay focused, which I feel like we have.
That's awesome. So, for those who are not familiar with, maybe they've never purchased a home or it's been a hot minute since they've had to purchase a property,
Yeah.
COVID, for those new to this conversation of housing, has certainly created a bottleneck of pressure, as some economists are calling it, where in the housing industry, we've just seen such a decrease in supply for a variety of reasons. And as inventory has opened up a little bit more, there's just been such a surge of buyer activity
Yeah.
for, again, a variety of reasons. And that in turn has created a higher demand on people like Trent with having to do home
Mhm.
inspections. So I'd like to kind of jump in, Trent, and talk a bit about why home inspections are important. I think the common general
Yeah.
consensus is yes, we want to make sure that this is a good investment. But what are things that people should not only look for when they're selecting a home inspection, but
Yeah.
also in selecting a home inspector?
Well, obviously, I'm going to say yes, 100% have a home inspection. I think nationally and on the percentages, I think roughly about 93% of all transactions have a home inspection tied with it. So that's a good positive number for our industry. I think the overall benefit of doing an inspection and having that process for any type of buyer, whether you're a new first time buyer or you've owned multiple properties as a homeowner, or even in the investment conversation where maybe an individual or a small company has a portfolio of properties that then they have inspected. It's just one of those due diligence tasks that, as an individual purchasing and making that decision, to have a unbiased third party person come in at any level of home to really comb deep into it. And so in a roughly about 2 to 3 hour process of a home inspection, we try to get our hands on everything. We open everything, we operate it, we get in it, on it, under it. And so it's a vast amount of information that's provided during that transaction process that then kind of starts to line up priorities, negotiable terms, things that may be more than likely the homeowner has never even been made aware of, and then that maybe should be discussed before moving forward. And so we work with a lot of different clientele. Investment groups will have us come out and do certain types of inspections for them. Obviously, we love working with new home buyers, first-time buyers, because our company and our team focuses on the education aspect of a home. So teaching you and showing you where all the different bells and whistles are is the fun aspect for us. And then we get to kind of show you some things that you may not get to go into: crawl space, attic, roof, all over. So the just vast amount of education that you can learn in a 2.5 hour time period is just well worth it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And before I forget, legal disclaimer here. I have to be careful about recommending companies. So please do your due diligence as a consumer. Make sure that whomever you select, is you have the choice to work with anyone. I don't care what an agent tells you. You have the legal right to choose whomever you want to work with, whether that be a title company, lender, so forth, including an inspector. So legal disclaimer here before I forget. And then secondly, as you were talking in that due diligence period, one of the most common objections I get, I think a lot of times when people are trying to purchase a home, they get very focused on, there's a lot of costs that come very quickly. Your earnest money deposit, then you have your appraisal fee that's usually collected around the same time, and then you have the home inspection, and before you know it, you're typically multiple thousands of dollars invested in a property that's not even yours yet. And I think by the time people get to the home inspection, they're like, how much is this going to cost? And, I educate my clients up front, so there's an expectation, but I think even if people are planning to spend 400 or whatever that number is going to be, a lot of times people try to go with who's the cheapest. And from your perspective, trying to be as unbiased as you can,
Sure.
Why do you see a difference in pricing between different home inspectors? And is the cheapest person going to give you maybe the same thing or better or just as good a services as someone who's more expensive?
Yeah, and I think to start out, and I will try to answer not just specifically towards our company as Heartland HouseMaster, because I want, as you kind of prefaced, is you got to do your research on the home inspection industry, what your realtor might be referring or recommending, friends, family members, the whole social media and review websites of everything on the internet. But I think it's, as far as a cost, it's very, very difficult to start understanding in just a few phone calls to inspectors and companies to try to compare apples to apples in what is included in that home inspection company's service, especially when you get outside of the conversation of just the standard full home inspection. because in our industry, we get into a lot of other service-related testings and inspection related elements that not every property has. For example, a home that's on a private well and private septic is a whole different animal than municipal water, and there's some additional options for inspection services and testing with that. And that's where the differences between home inspection companies really start to show itself is, how much are they charging for, radon testing or termite wood destroying insect inspections, which those two I mentioned first because those are the two most common. We get into things like septic inspections and how far does that inspection company really go into the accessibility of the tank and the dye test and everything that's included. So I think a lot of it is number one, I would always listen to your real estate agent because they're in that industry, and their job is to kind of understand a lot of different aspects of what each step of the process requires and what avenue's the best. The cheapest versus the most expensive, a lot of times it's size of company, support staff, what other client benefits kind of come along with that company. Does that home inspection company include any type of guarantee on their reports? Meaning if I come in and say, yes, that's satisfactory, is that company or individual going to stand behind it and have some sort of support in the case that things might change in the immediate future? Do they guarantee their work and their reporting, and just really how well they're able to present the information. So I think quality of reports, quality of comments, every home inspection company and inspector uses different words and phrases and tones in their reports. And I think that's something we kind of pride ourselves on is we've been doing this now for 10 years. I've carefully combed through our comments and how that is worded to better suit the transaction and the buyer and the agent and leveraging things. And so for us, we've now completed over 12,000 inspections in our company. And so I think that goes a long way is, you might be able to get a cheaper price, but what kind of reporting software are they using? What kind of comment structure, timeliness even, how quickly that report is delivered can come down to some of those differences.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. I always feel like the quality of the inspection is reflected in the thoroughness of the report that's provided. And you as the professional in that department are welcome to disagree with me, but even if it is, a quality inspector, really that report is what gives me leverage to say this is what the inspector said. And one of my biggest pet peeves as an agent is when I come across reports that don't classify the types of repairs, or they leave it so vague that you might say, well, this roof has a shingle that's missing, or there's moisture in the attic and, there's some type of biological growth and it needs to be evaluated by, possibly a mold specialist. But, where does that fall in what's considered a major repair? And then unfortunately that puts myself and the buyer in a position where it's harder to argue, or if there's not enough information from the inspector side, which I've heard inspectors say that they might not give as much information or choose not to classify that information for liability purposes, it just makes it harder on the negotiating side. So that's something, having worked with you guys before in several other great inspectors in the area that, when you do come across a good inspector or pay for
Mhm.
that quality of service, it is reflected in the report, and your agent can go to bat for you and help
Yeah.
really save you money at the end of the day.
At the end of the day, and I think that's where, I go back to that client or buyer has chosen a real estate agent because they trust them, they know them at some deeper level, or have some interaction with them. And I always tell clients, well, talk to your agent first, get your agent's perspective. And a lot of times that's because agents in prior dealings have maybe gone through a not so positive situation,
Mhm.
and how that inspection company, how that owner or that individual inspector responds. Do they get involved? Are they helpful? Are they responsive? I think that comes down into more um, relying on your agent's recommendations, whether that's, three different names or four different names, because I know the legal aspect of not just saying, hey, here's the one I want you to use. But that agent has a lot more history of dealing with the positives and the negatives in other transactions with those inspectors.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remind the consumer as well in this case that we as agents are ethically obligated to communicate to you anytime there's a kickback. And most of the time, if we
Hmm.
do receive a financial kickback, we have to um, not only disclose it to you, but make sure that there's some type of written form of disclosure presented as well. And most of the time in our industry, it's just not allowed that we get
Yeah.
kickbacks of any kind.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes people get hesitant on, oh, why are you referring me this person? Is there some type of under the table
Yeah.
incentive? And unfortunately, having seen a handful of movies or episodes recently with some type of estate agent, whether it's in Britain or
Hmm.
a realtor, the shows unfortunately, probably in a comical sense, paid off agents to be very salesy and underhanded. But
Yeah.
I think a lot of us, a lot of agents actually come from teachers and medical backgrounds. So you're probably working with a former nurse or former teacher, and we all have a heart of trying to serve and help protect people. So I don't mean to get off on a tangent, but all of that to
No.
say
Yeah.
that, um, we don't give kickbacks, or if we do, then we have to disclose it. So.
Absolutely. I think we're here to make your life easier and make your transactions smoother, so there's less headaches, and you can focus on other things than dealing with our involvement. So that's our ultimate goal, is make it smooth, efficient, and accurate, so we can keep the process moving.
Or Trent, let's look at it this way. You get a heads up notice if this house is going to be a headache that you want to pass on ahead of time.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Understatement of the year. Well, before we get too far um, into the weeds here, I kind of want
Yeah.
to bring us back to why home inspections are important and preface that more around new home construction, because
Yeah.
with inventory having been very tight lately in existing homes, a lot of people are gravitating towards new builds, and they build a great rapport with the sales agent, and they get this beautiful brochure, and there's a lot of trust that's created up front. And then when it comes time to, well, do you want to have a third party inspection, or do you want to use just trust the inspection process that we go through? And, most of my clients have chosen to have that home inspection performed on new construction. I've only had one opt out of it, and it was because they had built before and felt comfortable with it. You can't
Yeah.
ever force somebody to do that, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on new home construction.
Yeah. And I think, back to my first couple statements was, I'm going to always recommend a home inspection. That's what we do, but a more practical kind of common approach is, especially with new construction in the current market that we're in, um, the demand is so great, and the builders are at such a limited amount of resources, not only material but labor and supervisors and managers, that in my experience and going into some of these new construction neighborhoods and on all sides of town, um, there's so much activity being completed in any given day in just one street of a neighborhood. I pulled into one. I had a new, I did a framing pre-drywall inspection because we do those as well, kind of in the middle of the process of construction. And I was just blown away with standing in one spot, how many homes under frame were being worked on at one time, that no matter how good or high quality the builder is in their reputation, they're relying on a local superintendent who's been given the responsibility of maybe that entire neighborhood. And that one person or two people from a particular builder, um, they're expected to monitor and watch and keep track of everything that's going on. But it's just not realistic when you put feet on the ground. And so with as many different subcontractors and trades and laborers and materials coming in and out, it's always good to just take a moment to pause, pause that process, and bring in not only yourself, but then a unbiased third party person that's not involved at all. We haven't seen it every step of the way, and we're not emotionally tied to it. From the builder's standpoint, they're emotionally and invested in it, as well as the buyer. And we kind of then can be brought in and say, okay, let me just take a look at this from a blank slate. And so we do a fair amount of construction pre-drywall inspections. We do more when they're completed, right around about 10 or 14 days before closing, and usually before the builder does their kind of final punch list or walkthrough with that buyer. And most of the times, we're not finding major, huge ticket items. But usually what we're finding is some of those things that a builder has already crossed off their list, they've checked it, and they've moved on to the next trade. But one trade affects the other trade, and the electrician affects the plumber, that affects the drywall, and it all kind of is encompassed around, if one guy does something, it may affect the other thing that's already been checked off the list. And so one of those things that we catch most frequently with new construction is the shingles. The roof shingles, once they are put on, and that subcontractor checks it off and the builder goes, yep, it's checked off, the building superintendent of that company nor the town code inspector actually get on the roof. And so that's something that a lot of people don't realize or know. But once that roof is put on, it's checked off the list, but you have a lot of other trades coming back over top of that roof to install gutters, siding, paint, caulk. You have a number of different trades that then use those shingles as their walking path, their platform, their hauling of equipment. And there's always some amount of shingle, granular surface, some type of damage. And that's just one kind of classic case in point. But that same thing kind of is seen in even just some of your finish work, because we understand when you're buying a new home, you're paying the cost of that new home. You want a new home just as if you were going to buy a new car. And so a lot of times we catch those things that, you know, exterior caulking. It's amazing, but the whole fear in our industry is water penetration,
Mhm.
and that seal, penetrations, caulking, roof. So I could go on and on, but I see for a general full home inspection, our average fee tends to fall somewhere about 350 to 375. And for that little bit of money compared to what you're putting on that price tag of a home, to kind of pause the process, force the builder to stop for just one day, and let's take a look at it from a different perspective.
Yeah, I think the general consensus is you want to have your foundation inspected pre-drywall and then
Mhm.
pre-closing. Would you say that that's accurate for new construction, or are there others?
Yeah, we our personal office and company have steered away from foundation
Hmm.
inspections at the construction phase, because that is one thing that the builder is not technically allowed to backfill or cover up any of the foundation until the town code inspector signs off on it.
Hmm.
Whether it's a basement, a slab, crawl space, they can't push that dirt back against the foundation until the town code inspector uh, gives his stamp of approval. Um, what then happens is, and we offered it for a period of time, but what we found was by the time we were notified, scheduled, we got out, they had already pushed back and did the backfill, filled the crawl space with pea gravel or what have you. They've kind of moved on because the town code inspector and so it just didn't give as much benefit to the client as
Hmm.
what we would like. I feel confident with foundation in the town code inspector process. I think it gets into when, in framing, you've got plumbers, electricians, framers, and fire caulking. You got so many different trades now starting to show up. So I highly, highly recommend pre-drywall, just after they fire caulk and before they insulate, and then at a final, prior to closing.
That makes sense. I think, where would you, like, is it ever possible? I mean, I hear your stance on Heartland's perspective with foundations. Obviously, you guys do this every day for a living. So, but just thinking from someone like my husband's perspective who wants to research and have the process um, fully analyzed at every stage,
Yeah.
I can hear someone possibly having reservations like, well, like, it makes sense what you're saying, but would there ever be a time where someone could be
Mhm.
caught off guard by not having their foundation inspected?
I guess there's always those scenarios, the one in 1,000, or the small chance. I think um, what I would lean on in that regards, if a buyer client was, more of that engineer kind of a mindset, or maybe from the industry, and just very, very knowledgeable,
Mm-hmm.
um, I think I would lean on my site superintendent to arrange that when the town code inspector is expected to be on property to do their portion,
Mm-hmm.
is see if the client could be there as well. That may not be feasible every time. Um,
I'm
I
sure the
think,
code inspector would love that too.
yeah, well,
I say
yeah.
that with sarcasm.
Yeah. There's a lot that fall outside of a home inspector's training, skill set, and expectations when it comes to, you know, what was the compaction specifications on the subgrade in the basement foundation. What PSI of concrete was called for, and did IMI bring out, there's so many very, very
You guys don't get into that?
detailed specs that get into footers and foundations and concrete and backfill that, in my opinion, unless that inspector individually had building experience, it starts to kind of, in our opinion, fall outside of what you're really leaning on a home inspector to do. And one quick example, and I don't want to sidetrack, swimming pools. Swimming pools is one service that we offer that we don't do ourselves. We subcontract that out. And we made a very specific and conscious decision of why we do that for pools, but maybe not for sewer scoping or mold testing or septic inspections, because I think there's a realistic limit of what a particular industry, and we're a very very heavily licensed, regulated, requirement of training industry, and I'm proud to be a part of that, but then I also feel like there's a limit.
Yeah, for sure. I think, and this is a good segue into one of the bullet points we had listed for tonight on where that limitation lies, because I think a lot of times you do get the client who's very invested and they want to make sure that, their hard-earned dollars are protected, that this is worth their time, that this house is going to be a blessing to them and not a curse after closing. What's that? I think it's Money Pit, that movie with Tom Hanks, where everything falls apart. We don't want that. So I think in some ways, especially if it's a first-time home buyer, you can't assign too much fear to something. And so with when we get into the general home inspection, again, it is general. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. I love you guys outsource the swimming pools. I think I'd love to come back to that later, because a lot of families are going to be putting in pools next summer. And so where do you see limitations arise in a general home inspection, and when should a consumer say, okay, it's time to bring in a specialist?
Well, and I think, that lines up in your statement, mirrors exactly what our industry guidelines, our state standards of operation. As home inspectors, we also are a part of associations that then set their own standards of licensing guidelines and expectations. So as a state, we're all licensed and at least headed in the same direction. Now, we're not all doing the same thing, but we're headed in the same direction. I think, the thing that we always refer to is, a very basic sentence is a home inspection is a limited time scope inspection of the readily accessible units of a home. And so there's a lot of things that you can read into in that statement, but we're not invasive. We're non-technical visual inspection. And so there's limitations, especially in a current occupied home. We're not technically liable or required to move personal belongings. Now, we all do it, to access that attic. We move a few boxes and some clothes and maybe shuffle some things around. But it's a case-by-case situation with that home belonging. Do I move the Mercedes Benz that's parked in the garage under the attic? Well, no, I'm not. I'm not going to move that. I think limit, and I explain this to my clients because I still am active in the field doing inspections on a weekly basis. you know, we are, and I don't compare myself to the medical field. I don't claim to be at that level. Um, but the best way that I can explain it is we're kind of the general practitioner. We're your general family doctor, and we have a large need and purpose for what we do. But in each area of the home, we understand that we are not a licensed trade electrician and plumber and HVAC and when you start thinking of all the different components. So I tell my clients that right up front is that the purpose of this is it's a general visual inspection of the condition as it sets today. Are things operating as intended? Are they installed as spec'd by the manufacturer? What else am I seeing? But certainly, I'm not going to claim that I am a certified licensed plumber. And to know that level. So our purpose is to see things through a home inspector's eye, and then start referring to different industry specialists because they're going to see things above and beyond what we see. But then I also explain that our purpose as a home inspector in our reports is not to get down to the nitty gritty of telling that person exactly how it should be repaired or what material exactly should be used in what way. I explain that even the simplest thing, simplest repair, maintenance item can be done a dozen different ways. And then when you get into more technical areas of the home, larger components, my goodness, you could pull 12 contractors in and they probably would have 12 different ways of suggesting to do it and 12 different cost estimates, ranging from high to low. So our purpose, the way I look at it, is in a limited time scope, roughly about 2 to 3 hours, we create that list and try to start prioritizing it through ratings and comments to then give that client and that agent a direction of here's where you might want to start in this process.
Yeah, I mean, I had a home inspection with you guys recently, and just the thoroughness of that report, the details. I mean, I had seen another one that a client had chosen to, they chose to refer out from another friend that had closed on a home and chose to use that particular inspector. And it was just night and day different between the two different reports. And so it's, if you are someone who is very detail oriented and likes a lot of information, HouseMaster might be a great fit for you, because it was a big report. I think it was 268 pages. So
they can get large. We warn our clients, don't be afraid of the total number of pages.
Yep.
We've done some things in our reports that cause those page numbers to grow. But there's a flip side benefit to that. One of the simple things, and I hear from agents who see a lot of different company reports, as you just referenced, sometimes they get reports and you just can't see what's in the picture. The picture is so small, or it's not in color, and it's like, well, that's half the battle. You've got the comment, but then the picture. So we've increased the size of our picture to accommodate some of those feedbacks. The other is, we do try to put in a lot of information. That's why we're there, is to educate, instruct. We identify where all your main components are, shut-off valves, just some helpful information for homeowners.
Yes. So that being said, information and the client's due diligence, slightly segueing into another thing that we had on our list to talk about tonight, is re-inspects. I have heard, I think you guys were actually on the panel for this list of inspectors. where in a continuing education class for realtors, you guys as inspectors said that 75% of the time when you go out to re-inspect properties where the seller has agreed to make repairs, 75% of the time those repairs are either not done at all or not done correctly. Would you concur?
Yes, I would say that is headed in the right direction. And I think, usually speaking, we're called in for a reinspect when there's one or more major items of repair. We typically aren't looking and coming back at loose doorknobs and caulk seams and whatever. Typically speaking, it's something on the roof, in the attic, or in the crawl space. Those areas that the common homeowner or buyer is not going to necessarily be able to just access and see, oh, look, they did it. Looks good. And so because of that, we're looking at more technical, larger scale things. And so, yes, I would say a lot of times there's some inconsistencies or gaps in what was requested and what was actually performed. And a lot of times we see that some of that is misconstrued in how things are communicated. Because you got to hope that whatever contractor and laborer was brought in to do the job got the instructions handed down correctly. But I think the other reason for that in a reinspection is at that point, now we're looking way more detailed at a single component. We have some head knowledge. We've been on site before. We've been given, whether it's copies of contractor completed invoices or work orders, or now we have way more information about this one particular area of the home, and we're going to go back out and comb through it even deeper. And so I think that also is why you hear that generalized statement of 75% we go back, they're still not done completely or correctly. It's because we're really now focusing in at a very minute detail.
Yes, I've unfortunately had clients, I think, again, referencing earlier, when if you as a buyer or seller were sitting down with me and then we talked through the buying process, and there's a universal agreement that yes, these steps and the due diligence period of having a home inspection and everything is important, like, oh yes, I'm going to do that. And I think a lot of times when it comes time to write that check, for whatever reason, I think people just get more budget conscious and they're like, well, based on the repairs, I think I'm okay. I think I can eyeball it and, be all right, and I just time and time again will say, look, like, the purpose of a final walkthrough is not a re-inspect. I'm not a licensed inspector. This is something that you really should have verified. And this is also the one and only time that the seller is on the hook to make these repairs. So while it's on, like, that reference of it's your monkey, we want to make sure that we minimize as much work for you after closing, because here's the other thing. You as a buyer might full well intend to make these repairs after closing, but life happens. And so what is considered a general or low maintenance item, if it doesn't get fixed or repaired, it could turn into a bigger problem down the road. So I think I would just encourage those of you watching this to fully utilize re-inspects while they are available. Yes, it might be a $75 to $150 fee, depending certainly on the quantity of what's being inspected again, but it's well worth it, because just I see it kind of like insurance. We hope that we spend the money and not have to need it, but when you spend the money and find out that you did need it, you're certainly glad that you did have it.
Yeah. Well, and I think also, I know a lot of inspection response documents are written to where you require a licensed or certified contractor with then provided documents that it's actually been paid. Well, at that point, if those two things have happened, if you assume that the seller and through, verification of documents, that this is a qualified, licensed, bonded, insured contractor, and it's been paid, well, you have to assume that typical seller is not going to go back in the crawl space and follow up on that workmanship or that installation. So the contractor at that point is still on the hook for doing the job correctly. And usually at that point, there's no more money exchanged. It's just the seller saying, hey, XYZ HVAC contractor, you didn't do it quite correctly or all the way. And it's a return trip, and they take care of it because they are a reputable, licensed, insured contractor that has to, keep his nose clean as well.
Yes, and I would say too, for consumers, you always want to make sure that, like Trent is describing, they're licensed and insured, because sometimes the sellers take it upon themselves to go ahead and start doing repairs, even if you haven't come to terms in the inspection negotiations, which can honestly make things a little complicated. Some people just try to do it because they're kind-hearted, trying to do the right thing. Oh, it's an easy fix. Or some people, like, oh, they've got Uncle Bob as a handyman and, he's not licensed, but, oh, he knows enough from watching YouTube videos. Sorry for the roast, but like it's one of those things that you really want to make sure is written into a contract so that your best interests are truly protected, because worst case scenario, you get in a courtroom after closing and something was agreed to be repaired. And if it's not specified, then the seller might not be on the hook. And that's kind of getting into legal advice and attorney. So certainly seek that professional where necessary. But yes, what Trent is saying, licensed inspectors or licensed contractors is very important.
Well, and I think it brings to mind, and it's kind of a off-topic recommendation. I find, and now I'm not doing as many inspections as some of my team members are in a total week, but I've been doing inspections for 10 years myself. The presence and attendance of that client at the inspection for the entire duration of the inspection is something that we highly recommend when a client or individual is calling to schedule an inspection with us and talking to our office staff. We highly recommend that that individual be there at the start of the inspection and stay for the total duration. I get it. I understand that, 2.5 hours and away from family or work, or, maybe can't get away from the job, or out of state buyers. There's always those situations. But as a general rule of thumb, the importance of that buyer being with the inspector during the whole process magnifies itself so much benefit, because a report as thorough and as complete as we try to be, and page numbers grow, we can only say so much in a report. We can only include so many pictures in a report before it even gets even longer. But to be able to, in real time, be with that inspector, hear from them what they're saying, actually see the condition or the component that then will end up in the report, and have some, couple minutes of dialogue, whether it, the inspector comes off the roof or out of the attic, or, crawl space, whatever, to be able to just hear that then gives that buyer so much more ability of understanding the full scope of not only what it looks like today, but what it means to look like after the fix or after the repair. So there's a lot more benefits of why we recommend that client to be with us for each inspection during that time. But in that future, then week to 2 weeks of negotiating and trying to get repairs made and meeting with contractors, well, now you're getting feedback from the seller and the seller's agent. And if that client is there on property, has seen it, talked with the inspector. They just have a better knowledge of what to expect moving forward through that seller negotiation.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to as well when you're negotiating repairs, or, say they aren't able to attend because they have a job that they cannot leave,
Yeah.
and it's their first home, and they might have some jitters about, this home's going to be, a nightmare to deal with, or whatever. But I think if you haven't had this experience before, or, you want this to be your forever home and a great investment, there can be some jitters around, this is a loose toilet. And I think fear is a liar. So it exists in our brain for a reason, but at the same time, I think it can amplify things that maybe shouldn't be as big of an issue. And so if you are able to attend, then, what you might feel is a big issue, you can talk that through with the inspector and say, well, actually, this isn't that big of an issue compared to others that we found. And you as the inspector can put things in their proper context and help that client understand, oh, well, this is an easier fix, or maybe, ultimately it also goes back to cost. It's not going to be that crazy to fix in the long run.
Yeah. And, we can in some cases tell that client, well, I have to put this in the report and I have to word it a certain way. But to be honest, this is something that might not need to be done for the next couple years. It's not something that, I expect every home buyer to get my report and then move in and start going, and doing every single item, within the first 90 days of moving in. That's just not realistic. And we know that as well.
Yeah. Did you have HVAC systems in mind?
Yeah.
It's nearing the end of its expected life.
Yeah.
So the general consensus on re-inspect is yes, you should have one. Would you say that's correct?
Yeah. I mean, I think maybe not to apply it to a blanket every inspection, every house. I think it really depends on what area of the home was negotiated and repaired on. I've mentioned that roof, attic, crawl space, basement, foundation, water, water related items. Water is the root of all evil for every home is water. So it really does depend on what fell out of that initial home inspection, and then I think just the overall comfort level of how well the seller is working with the transaction as a whole, can play into some of that decision. But if you're a buyer that's just very precautious or very detailed oriented, or it does have some of those bigger ticket areas of the home, like you've referenced, now's your time. Now is the time before closing, before you sign that line, to put yourself in a comfort level.
Oh, I trust your judgment. I just always tell people that it's something you want to budget for, because when it comes back to it, the last thing I think we want anyone to be is remorseful, or, have regret that, oh, I wish I would have done this. So, again, it's certainly contextual to the transaction, but segueing into costs associated with different kinds of inspections and different types of inspection services you guys offer, and kind of, I guess, what is your recommendation when a client is going to purchase a property? Obviously, it's going to be more property specific, but what are the core, if someone's going to purchase, having a home inspection, are there additional services that they should add on, or questions they should ask to make sure that they are getting a fully comprehensive home inspection?
Yeah, and I can certainly speak to that. For each of our what we call ancillary services, or kind of additional testing or inspection related services, is definitely property related. One thing that I've talked about before is as a client is in the uh, property search process, whether that's online or with an agent or kind of sorting through all the different communities or listings. I always encourage that client at that time, early on in the process, maybe just starting a sketch note list of what are some things that concern that individual. What are some key triggers for the husband, wife, or the family, the children, that you want to kind of just be aware of. And then once you start to narrow down into a particular property, then you start dialoguing with your agent and really getting into, well, how old is the home? Uh, are there certain elements, structures, or components on the property that fall outside of a standard full home inspection? And I'll kind of address both of those because I've mentioned two different things. More on the personal level, if you're an individual or someone in your family is very, very sensitive to allergens or mold spores or indoor air quality, that's more of a personal, it's your concern that you're aware of. And that might be whether you're looking at a 5-year-old home or a 50-year-old home, to maybe inquire about indoor air quality, mold, air testing, things like that. The other then, personally, is, what are some of the other things on property? Swimming pool, we mentioned. Are there multiple structures? Because the standard full home inspection only encompasses that home and that foundation. So if you have multiple barns or outbuildings and things that you want inspected, would be questions to start asking. More property specific is in the well, private water well, scenario and septic. Not every home has that. It's property driven, but then are you concerned about it? It goes into that. We're obviously in a service type industry and providing inspection and related services. And I'll show you here real quick if I can do a quick share screen. This is something that we produce and hand out to agents and kind of have available in our Facebook and website. This is it. This is kind of how our company breaks it down. How we classify different complete full home inspections versus the additional or ancillary services. The two most common is radon testing, which, a lot of people start leaning towards radon testing with homes on basements.
Mhm.
And that is typically the highest likelihood that you might have high radon, but not necessarily a rule of thumb, because high radon can happen in crawl spaces and slabs as well. Wood destroying insect or termite inspections. But you can kind of see on this list, not every home is going to require every inspection service. And I think that's where you start to include your real estate agent into the conversation. What's on that property, what we should be concerned about, and maybe some of the history of the property. We noticed a uptick in sewer scoping inspections. That's kind of down in that lower right area. Sewer scoping inspections has a lot to do with how old the property is. Have there been major upgrades or repairs to the main drain? Has the homeowner experienced issues over the years? A lot of different scenarios go into that, but sewer scoping is one of those add-on services that from time to time, more often than not, we're on an older property and seeing some concerns in that drain out to the main connection at the street that you're otherwise not going to see during a full home inspection.
Yeah, I think it's um, going back to what you said earlier about new home construction sales, where they have, just a lack of people trying to speed up the process, trying to help people. And I don't want to incorrectly assign or give a negative bias towards builders. A lot of times it's good people trying to earn an honest living and do the right thing. And unfortunately,
Mhm.
we're not on the other side of heaven yet where everything's perfect and made right. I'm trying to picture what life was like back in the Garden of Eden when there wasn't any weeds, trying to imagine work without problems, so to speak. But
Yeah.
unfortunately, people do make mistakes, or stuff just doesn't get caught. And so again, that goes back to why we want to have home inspections. But it is interesting to me that on the plumbing side of contracting, again, it just goes back to labor force
Mhm.
and the lack of people. If you have a teenager who's looking for a career path, plumbing makes great money.
Yep.
6-figure business with, you get the apprenticeship, and
Yeah.
anyway, it's neat. So, and several other trade industries are like that. But from what I've heard, um, you know, the supervisor just doesn't always get to come over and,
Mhm.
like you said earlier, just make
Yeah.
sure that work is double checked, make sure it's done right. And so you might have an apprentice working on your house, which is a very expensive product, and it might get missed. And, then $10,000
Yeah.
later, when you're having to dig up the drain going out to the city connection, or
Yeah.
whatever that's going to cost. Would you say that that's right, or is it even more than that?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of variables play into that. If you're going under concrete patios, if it's on the other side of the street or on your side of the street where the main drain connects, I would think, you know, that upwards of 8, 10,000 is probably, on the high end, but going to cover most of your issues and scenarios. I think I just think new construction, they're highly architecturally designed and engineered to build a home at the shortest time interval, how quickly, with the most effective and efficient material. But even there, the architect and the manufacturer spec designer has to rely on the laborer who shows up that day to perform the task as expected. And I think as a buyer, if you were to uh, receive a list of all the different individuals who played a part on that property during the construction process, you would see a pretty lengthy list of subcontractors and individual names on that list. And new home construction cost is at a premium. We all know that. And for a few $100s, $500, if you do a home inspection plus a sewer scope, you're, somewhere around 550, combined. It's going to give you a lot of insight and peace of mind. But, we want to know that we're meeting the client's requests. And a lot of times those clients come to us and are having services performed, most likely because in a previous home that they've owned, or maybe a previous family member's home that they've owned, maybe the parents they've lived, upbringing, a lot of times like, well, why are you having a sewer scope done? What made you decide that? Oh man, I remember when I was a 20-year-old, and my mom and dad, they just dealt with this, or my previous house had this old clay tile. And a lot of times we get that from, individual perspectives of mold testing, sewer scope. It's usually because they've had an experience that they don't want to deal with that again.
Yep. Yep. I've had very similar dialogues with clients who have had a washer and dryer leak on the second floor
Yep.
and said, never again. It's going to
Never
be on the
again.
main level. And I have a thought on the sewer inspection slash new home construction. I think a lot of times when you are in a new home construction community that is being built out, for those who don't live in a new home construction community, this is a thing in Indiana. And if you're out of state and it's not a thing, then it can be kind of disconcerting in the sense that your neighbors will come over and walk through spec houses if they're able to be accessible, or they'll walk through the property and look at what's being built because they're just curious. And sometimes kids will go over on new construction lots and play on that. And obviously that's not good because, there can be exposed nails and all of that. But
yeah.
I just think about that because, all it takes is a kid dropping a big enough rock down maybe that PVC pipe, or I don't know. I mean, I just wonder.
Crazy things happen every day. And, part of our job and part of our process of being included in that transaction is to try to bring some of those things to the surface of knowledge, so you can put them in writing and take a look at them. There's a lot of misnomers about, oh, well, you shouldn't test for radon on a new construction home because the soil and the earth is moving. It's like, well, I mean, yeah, but it's still there. It's still a possibility. It still happens. We're just trying, I think, in some respect, our goal is to limit that individual's exposure to future liability concerns. We're not going to eliminate it completely. I refer to homes as a living, breathing, it is alive. Your home is a living, breathing, animate object. It's ever changing, especially in Indiana. As quickly as our temperatures and our humidity outside and inside change, even this time of year, when your seasons change here in Indiana, think about what a home and the material of a home is experiencing when in a 24-hour swing you can have a 50-degree temperature difference and a 60% humidity drop or elevation, and it's like you're relying on that home to kind of move as fast, and sometimes they don't always do that, but that we're kind of here to point those things out and identify those.
Excellent. Well, Trent, we are wrapping up on the hour here, if not a couple minutes over. I'd like to just kind of give, like, in a 30-second pitch, what is something that you absolutely want people who watch this interview to take away from?
Well, I mean, I guess I think, obviously I represent my company of Heartland HouseMaster, and we promote, ourselves in the industry with buyers and real estate agents. But I think the thing that I would want to encourage is view the inspector as someone who's on your team. Whether they're being referred to you by an agent or you're finding their name, Google searches and positive reviews, whoever you choose to hire, that you're hiring them for you and your team player. We get hired by the buyer. We work for the buyer. Our best interest is for that individual. We're not there to work for the agent or work for anybody else except that buyer. And so utilize the inspector's experience, skill set. You're bringing somebody on site to ask questions, learn, because that inspector, if you've done your due diligence, they've either been through hundreds and hundreds of homes of all different calibers. When you talk about new construction homes, there's reasons why we look at certain things, because we end up going back in that home when it's 8 years old or 10 years old, and we see those things. So that home inspector, you're hiring them, you're paying them, you're signing the order agreement directly with that inspector. So they're there to work for you and be on your team. And we're there to just keep things education and keep a level head, because regardless of the condition, anything in a home can be fixed or repaired. So we don't get too panicky over things, because anything can be addressed.
Awesome. Well, Trent, if people have further questions or would like to connect with you about scheduling a home inspection, what would you direct them to?
Well, I'll pop up this real quick. This is just a little piece of information on our company. Our phone number there, the 317-209-9100, is direct to our office for scheduling and information. Our website is heartland.housemaster.com. You can schedule online through that website. We are on Facebook, and we try to put out a lot of helpful information about homes and home inspections, but in a fun, entertaining twist. So I would say phone number, website, and Facebook. You can find us, and we're here to answer questions and help educate.
Yeah, and I think for those of you who are thinking of selling, Trent, I think this is a great touch point for people to connect with you, because I saw a pre-listing checklist recommendation from Trent earlier. And so if you're thinking of selling, I encourage you to connect with Trent for that. It's very comprehensive, and few inspectors actually, I think, really promote that. And then Trent did not ask me to do this, but I actually had this sitting on my desk. And so from a past inspection, agents, if you're watching this, I thought this was very classy. They sent me a thank you card, which was really cool. And then they sent me 2 coupons. So if you are a client watching this, I have coupons, $25 off a full home inspection. You will have to obviously connect with me to get those, but Trent didn't ask me to say that. I just thought I would mention that as a little promo for the video here. But Trent, I do want to be respectful of your time. Thank you so much for
Thank you.
agreeing to do this on a Thursday night. I hope everybody found this to be valuable, and I will certainly post the links in the original post so people can connect with you. But thank you so much.
Perfect. Thank you, Jessica. Everyone have a great evening.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.